Thank you. Okay, so I wanted to share a little bit about where my perspective comes from in what we're about to talk about. So over the years, I've had the good fortune to spend my career in a variety of different areas. I started out, I guess what is a long time ago now, as a Unix systems administrator. And found my way to information security, infrastructure engineering, application architecture, and now spend my life in the cloud and DevOps world. And one of the things that I find interesting about that is that it seems to me that I'm pretty much back to where I started. So back in the good old days, and I feel like it is the good old days, because when I started out in this industry, the folks that were in the industry as long as I have been at this point were telling me about punch cards and static core memory and things that I didn't really have any experience with. But there really wasn't a lot of separation between development and operations in the world that I started out in. I was an administrator. I sat with the DBA. I sat with the developers. We worked as a single team in order to deliver a business application. That was our primary function. But all good things come to an end, and we all hear the pets versus cattle analogy, and I basically took care of my pets, and that just really did not work. We really didn't have much standardization. All of the applications ran on different infrastructure. It was not cost effective, and the industry changed. We moved to this ITSM model and created the shared service functions, and then we had all these lovely frameworks that came about, and standards and religions, and they were fantastic. I've worked in organizations that implemented all of these. And so really where we originally were focused on trying to build this incredible clockwork machinery that was just beautiful and elegant and handcrafted and worked really, really, really well, we then wound up with this, where we were all separated from each other and we were all focused on doing completely different things, and all of a sudden our job was more important than everybody else's job. And it didn't really matter what it is that we were really there to do. We had a job, we had standards, we had processes, and it became a struggle. And particularly at scale today, in an organization like the one that I work in, it's a major issue. So I want to take you on a little diversion and talk about the Model T Ford, Henry Ford's vision for the assembly line. And so Henry Ford is widely regarded as being the guy who perfected. He didn't invent, but he did perfect the assembly line back in 1913. And so through heavy standardization and very limited variation, I'm sure everybody has heard the comment, you can have a Model T Ford in any color you want as long as it's black. He was able to achieve a certain level of efficiency. Interestingly, the reason that black paint was required, or was the only color that was provided, was because of drying time, not because they didn't offer colors. Prior to 1913, they offered it in a number of colors. But when they got to the assembly line vision, they had to stop it because they could not get the paint to dry fast enough. I feel like we make those types of concessions in what we do in automation all the time. And so all these different pieces were pulled together and built into these units of assembly, and then the moving assembly line, and one after the other in serial succession. These parts were assembled, these units of assembly were pulled together into a final finished product. Obviously, I want you to be thinking about how this works in your organizations with IT. But he was able to reduce something that took originally 12.5 hours and got it down to 93 minutes. Now that's a huge improvement in time, order of magnitude, right? And so I'm sure in your organizations, that order of magnitude for the automation platforms that have been put in place, the cloud computing platforms that have been put in place, it's probably a huge difference in time between what it used to be and what it is now. So what was next? What do you do next after you have created this standards-based model? Well, you create automation. The sad part is that this is actually how we approach automation in the data centers, in cloud computing. We replace the human with an automaton that happens to do the work of that human. Nothing really has changed. Realistically, if you look at the automotive industry, keeping with that theme, those robots do not look anything like people. They do not perform the function the way that the people perform them. They're fit for purpose. They are focused on doing one particular job, doing it well, doing it in a way that their form factor has been specifically designed to perform it. There is no constraint in the automation for how the human being had originally done the work. I spent over 2 years focusing on data center automation, services automation, and the one thing that always remained the same is nobody wanted to change their process. Nobody wanted to change how they were thinking about delivering the end product. This is the way that we do it. Your automation has to be compliant with the standards that have been set forth, well, because that's the audited process, and we know that that's okay. The auditors like that. And so we're going to keep it exactly like that. So we wound up with this. It's the same silos, but now they're automated. And then the people who used to perform the jobs, well, there's fewer of them, but they're still there and they're still pulling the strings behind the automation that is performing the work. So too often we do get to that point and then we raise the flag and it's victory. We don't need to do anything anymore. We automated it. It works. It's better than it was before. But somehow that seems to fall dramatically short. So one of the things that I spend a lot of time in my role doing is working with application teams. And working with the application teams to recognize that if they want their applications to work in a cloud world, if they want their applications to get the benefit of the scale of cloud computing, that they need to change the architecture of those applications. But for some reason, we don't really think about changing the architecture of the underlying plumbing that we deliver in order to deliver those applications. The focus always seems to be, this is how we do things. You must use it in this fashion. And so this is where I start to get into some arguments with a lot of the vendors that I deal with, the folks that are coming in and purveying their automation platforms and their cloud computing platforms and their very abstracted views of how service delivery should be. And I respect that all vendors need to be able to put together a product that they're going to be able to sell into the enterprise. There's a revenue stream, and they're selling to the data center directors who have roles and jobs that they understand and they want to continue to understand and continue to perform. So here's where I get into the argument. We're building these cloud platforms, but they're all still template driven. It's still an ITSM-based model. I still have defined my infrastructure as being delivered in a template-driven model. And I have to consume those templates. These are the machine types that have been defined. They might have roles, some sort of an application server running on a server platform. Its architecture is already defined. The network that's associated with it has already been defined. It's great that I have software-defined networking, but you're going to get it. You're going to get this VLAN concept that we already had, and it's going to be attached to the machine. And if it's a Java application server, then all the Java application servers will be in that VLAN, and it can talk to the underlying database platforms, but it's all been templated. Just like the automation needs to be, there needs to be a form that follows the function, right? And so is the application being driven by the underlying infrastructure? Or should the application be driving that underlying infrastructure? So the last I checked, IT organizations are chartered with delivering business applications. That's our job. That's how we provide value to the businesses that pay our salaries. But somehow, the focus always seems to be on this concept of IT as a business, or I'm a service organization, and therefore I'm going to run my infrastructure organization like a company. But I just don't see that as being how we go about the delivery of that end goal, which is delivering the business applications. So this is what is being fed to me on a day-in, day-out basis. And you know, there's a lot of layers of indirection in here. And at each layer of indirection, I lose a certain amount of fidelity, right? Because basically these are virtualization layers, and they obscure the layer below it from me. And by the time I get down to the actual physical infrastructure, I've completely lost any resolution as to what I'm actually deploying on. I don't know if the storage that I'm deploying on is being managed the way that I need it to be managed. I don't know if the compute is being managed the way it needed to be managed. Perfect example. If I have a cluster of nodes and that cluster is providing me reliability, how can I guarantee that that cluster is not deploying onto the same physical virtualized node? It's very difficult. There are certain mechanisms of being able to cause some of that anti-affinity, but it's very, very difficult when we keep layering these products on top of each other, these services on top of each other, where we are losing the underlying understanding. It's almost like when you're looking through water, right? And the object looks like it's over here, but it's not, because the light, the water bends the light. At each layer, that light is being bent. So, you know, we heard Donnie speak yesterday, and he was talking a lot about cloud and DevOps and infrastructure as code and automation platforms, and we've made great strides in autonomic infrastructure. Yeah, CF Engine has been around for a really, really long time. We've all this lineage that has come with Chef and Puppet and Ansible and Salt, and we've got these software-defined everything layers. There's such a huge opportunity here to do something different, and do it in a different way. When I look at even the hardware that we're bringing in now, if I look at the networking layer, my network switches, they're being managed by Chef because they're commodity hardware. They're running Linux basically as an operating system. It allows us a huge amount of control that we never had before. But the network people still want to manage them as if they were traditional Cisco gear that they would have acquired. So what if we had autonomic application management? What if our applications basically had the ability to manage themselves? What could we do? We could do all sorts of very, very cool things. But this depends upon a change in the model. So if we go back to the Henry Ford assembly line concept, that is very control theory based, right? There's some sort of central brain that is bringing everything through, is making the determination as to what step is going to happen next. And you have to come back to that brain. I don't think we can do that anymore, particularly when it comes to autonomic applications. We have to provide something that is going to be much, much more independent, almost like little bubbles floating in an autonomic cloud. Aren't our platforms just applications too? They're just software. Java application servers, web servers, database platforms, they're just applications. Why can't we manage them the same way? So I have applications and I have platforms all being autonomically managed. These applications need to communicate with the platforms need to communicate with the infrastructure. But if I go back, sorry, I'm going to go back here for a second. Why do I need that infrastructure as a service layer? Why can't I just talk to the underlying infrastructure directly from my platforms? It's there for abstraction. It's there for me to define my templates. It's there for me to offer my service exactly as I've been offering it for ages and ages before. So what if we provided a means for the applications to communicate with the autonomic platforms and the infrastructure? What would that give us? Well, it certainly would give us the ability to start eliminating that infrastructure as a service layer. I'm sure that there are a lot of folks here who probably don't agree with that. I think that there are a lot of folks that think that there is a necessity to continue to manage the infrastructure in the same way. Well, you know what? I actually agree with you. We're not going to be able to change the entire world all at once. Our applications have been structured for the last umpteen years to deliver on a very structured platform, and converting them to a less structured platform is going to take a long period of time. I had an opportunity to sit with some of the architects that are responsible for application inception at an organization I was at, and I wanted to understand, you know, how long would it take for us to, if we let all of our applications die a natural death through their normal course of life, how long would it take us to be able to shift the course of history? And the response was around 22 years. And I don't think we can wait that long. So one of the things that I've been a proponent for at this point is basically building parallel infrastructure or a parallel management model where we can start to build that next wave of autonomic application that can take advantage of the underlying infrastructure that we would like to present for the future. So in this proposed model, we've got applications, we've got lightweight platforms, and then we have the underlying software-defined layers. The lightweight platforms are aware of the underlying software-defined compute, the software-defined networking, and the software-defined storage. The applications in some cases need to communicate with them directly, but fundamentally they're running on top of the lightweight platforms. It's different, but it works. It's something that we've been able to do. It's something that then allows us to build an entirely new ecosystem for our application developers to be able to take control of their own destiny with their applications. So I was sharing with somebody just a few minutes ago, this is an untested deck. This is the first time I've gone through it, and I've gone through it about 10 minutes faster than I anticipated. So I'll leave it up to Eric if we want to take questions or how we want to go from
That's
here.
up to you. You want to answer questions?
I'm happy to answer questions.
We have questions? We have questions all the way back, all the way at the back of the room. Thank you. So for these applications, lightweight platforms, and the different SD components, are there any emerging standards that describe how to manage these? I'm thinking of a couple, but I'd be interested to hear your take.
You know, I think for us, Oasis Camp has been the model that we have gravitated towards, but it, you know, there's a lot of pieces that work in here, and we're working with autonomic platforms and promise theory and starting to understand how you make decisions around placement of workloads based upon the necessity of the underlying of the underlying platforms and technologies. But, there's a lot of interesting discussions that go on. We're starting to see applications that are no longer built on relational databases, but being built on non-relational data stores. Those non-relational data stores start to take the responsibility for some of the things that the infrastructure used to do. So we need some mechanism by which to be able to then do that mapping of those new platforms or those new paradigms on top of infrastructure that was really never designed for that. Because over the past 20 years, it's been a finger-pointing battle between the dev team and the ops team of, performance is bad, it's their fault, right? And so the application teams bang on the heads of the infrastructure teams, telling them, look, you need to, it's not running fast enough. Make it faster with better, more expensive infrastructure. So there is some complexity there that has to be resolved. There's some intelligence that has to be built into the platform to start to take into account the needs and demands of the upper layers. I'm not sure if that answered your question. Okay.
Other questions? I'll try not to run into the monitor.
Yeah, so my question is, what happens to the OS here? The OS really does a lot of things for platforms built on top of it, and in terms of managing the resources underneath compute, network, storage, memory, etc. Does the OS, do we include that somehow in our platforms? Or are we going to split it into components that help manage compute, network, and storage separately? Where does the OS go?
So I think we can see that there are certain trends, right? We heard a little bit yesterday about Docker. We have seen with Red Hat, with their release of Atomic, some changes in thought as to how we treat the underlying operating system. The operating system in this model starts to become somewhat diminished in responsibility. It's a host, right? There were days. Look, I showed you my little full circle of my career. In the early days, there was not a lot of difference between a sysadmin and a developer. It was really what career path we chose, right? Same degree, same skills, at least initially. We used to write our own code in order to manage the platforms, create the automation systems. Some of the tools and technologies have matured to the point where some of that handcrafted management no longer needs to be built and exist on that underlying operating system layer. We're abstracting it out and we're pushing it up higher and higher into the ecosystem. So I guess my base answer is that the operating system starts to become less and less important, becomes more and more of a host for the parasite that is going to be the platform that sits on top of it. The days of an application existing within the context of an operating system are fundamentally gone, right? Our applications span, even the platforms that our applications run on have to span multiple nodes. So is the context for that going to be in the OS? Probably not. It can't remain there any longer.
One last question. Anybody? All right, Adam, thank you very much.
Thank you.